Great. Well, thank you very much, and lovely to see you, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Chris Barton. I'm His Majesty's Trade Commissioner for Europe, and it's my privilege and pleasure to work to encourage a thriving UK-Europe trade and investment relationship. I look after a team. We're in 38 countries around Europe, of course, including the European Union, also the EFTA countries, the Western Balkans, and Israel. I want to share three perspectives with you today on the UK's trade and investment strategy with Europe. And the first thing I want to emphasize is that the trade partnership between the UK and Europe is of fundamental importance. Trade and investment, we strongly believe in the UK, is a force for good. It drives economic growth, it creates jobs, it improves living standards. That is massively important at macro level. It's also important at micro level, thinking of each individual who has a job, each individual who sets up a business and sees it succeed, each family supported by that trade and investment benefit. So this really matters at any time. It matters particularly, I'd say, at the moment, when we see a range of headwinds in terms of our overall global economic situation, when we see both the opportunities but the challenges of transforming our economies to a more sustainable future on which trade and investment really depends. And we've seen it in terms of the need to improve our security at a time, again, of a lot of geopolitical tension. So it is especially important now. It's also especially important here. The UK exports, trades over 53% of its trade is with Europe. About 45% of that is with the European Union. That means that we have a trade relationship worth £960 billion a year. That is massively important. For Cyprus itself, £3.5 billion trade, over £5.7 billion invested in each other's countries. But I think it's more than just the statistics. Because the UK and other European countries, of course, we are neighbours, we share a hugely rich tapestry of economic and commercial and political and personal and cultural connections, which means that our relationship is hugely important. And at this time of a lot of challenge, we share fundamental values. So yes, our trade and investment partnership is hugely important economically, but it's more than just economics. So what does that mean for the UK's strategy towards trade with Europe? Well, it means that on following Brexit, the first thing we want to do is make sure that we had as good and as strong a trading agreement as we could have with the EU as we left the EU itself, which we have in the TCA. We look to ensure a rollover of 10 other free trade agreements that we have with other countries across the European continent. And we're looking to improve some of those even now as we negotiate with Switzerland and Israel. At the same time, we've worked very hard to ensure pragmatic implementation of the new arrangements. So, for example, in our approach to customs and border controls, sanitary and phytosanitary checks in terms of UK conformity assessment for goods. We've sought to take an approach which makes it easier for business to adapt to new rules in a steady and timely way. So, and then thirdly, in terms of trying to make the most of this relationship, we have a very active program of export and investment promotion, working to make sure that we can advise companies on the tremendous opportunities that are around, advocate those opportunities, why they should be seizing them, and assist them to do so. So, first point I want to say is that trade and investment partnership between UK and Europe is hugely important for all of us, for both the economic and the wider reasons. And I'd also like to say at that point a big thank you to everybody in this room who is part of that. Because if you are involved in trade and investment between UK and Europe, you are part of creating jobs, of driving growth, improving living standards, sustaining our green transition and our security. So thank you. That's message one. It is of fundamental importance for us. Second thing is that I believe the opportunities for UK-Europe trade and investment partnership are tremendously strong. Now, there's no getting away that the last few years have been challenging. Of course, Brexit brought a number of challenges in terms of trade and investment. So did then COVID, the terrible events in Russia, Ukraine, the consequent impact on cost of living and prices and energy prices and more generally have been a very difficult mix for over the last few years. And that's been particularly hard for certain sectors, for certain size of companies, and in certain countries. And even now, as we know, the global geopolitical situation and geoeconomic situation is a tough one. But I nevertheless believe that the opportunities for UK-Europe trade are tremendously positive. Why do I say that? Well, partly, I'd start with what I've already mentioned in terms of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, the TCA, the regulatory basis. Now, of course, that is not the same as the single market or the customs union, but the TCA is a world-class free trade deal. In fact, I would challenge anyone to come up with a trade agreement that the UK has with any other part of the world, or the EU has with any other part of the world outside the customs union and single market, that is as strong and as effective as the TCA. It gives us a really sound basis to see our trade and investment grow. Beyond that, if you look at the economics and the stats, what's happening, well, our overall exports, UK to the EU, are now at the highest level they've ever been, 21% higher than they were in 2019, before Brexit, before COVID, before Russia-Ukraine, with Europe as a whole 26% higher. Now, some of that, of course, is driven by prices, but we're seeing that real growth in trade between us, which is hugely welcome. Politically, we are in far more positive place now after, again, some difficult years with the Windsor Framework in place, important milestones like the UK rejoining Horizon, with the cooperation that you've seen between the UK and European Union counterparts and other European countries dealing with terrible events such as Russia-Ukraine, working together in COP for climate change solutions and so forth, underlines that at political level we're in a positive place. And underlining it all, I'd say, is, as so often, the people aspect. What I referred to earlier on, that rich tapestry of personal connections, of the political, economic, commercial, cultural links, which mean that we have a really strong basis to see our trade and investment and wider partnership grow. So what does that mean for UK's strategy for trade and investment with Europe? I'd say we want to make sure that we work on both the policy and the promotion. The policy to reduce any barriers to trade, make it as easy as possible for British companies, for European companies to trade together, to invest together. So we're making sure that we're looking to implement the Trade and Cooperation Agreement as efficiently as we can. And beneath some of the headlines you sometimes see, actually there's been really constructive discussion, for example, between customs authorities on both sides, helping companies try to adjust to the new rules. We've looked to build on the bilateral flexibilities that there are within the TCA. For example, here in Cyprus, agreeing mutual recognition of professional qualifications in accountancy. We're looking to use flexibility at the EU level. For example, at the moment, active discussions on ensuring that the rules of origin around electric vehicles do not lead to the perverse outcome that we put tariffs on green cars, but not on petrol and diesel cars. We need to work together to ensure that our approaches to some of the challenges we've already heard today in terms of sustainability, in terms of security, in terms of the actions that other countries take, that we respond to those not in a protectionist way that raises new barriers between us, but in an open way and that seizes new opportunities where we see them arise, for example, in areas like hydrogen. So the trade partnership between UK and Europe is tremendously important. I firmly believe that the opportunities for it to grow are tremendously strong, and we have policies in place to do that. And then finally, I want to emphasize that the UK and Europe trade and investment partnership matters not just for us, but it matters globally. I believe very strongly, both professionally and personally, in what I said about trade and investment being a force for good. Open and fair trade, open and fair competition matters for our prosperity, it matters for our security. Now, that ought to be a non-controversial thing to say, but I think the reality is it is becoming increasingly contested, that view. Sometimes that's for well-meaning reasons. People look at the need to address climate change, look at the need to ensure health and so forth, development, and say, well, maybe we need to check, is trade and investment the way to help there? Sometimes it's responding to the sort of behaviors which we do not want to see, such as unfair competition, a rejection of the rules, labor exploitation, political oppression, economic coercion. And this has led some people to question the priority of open and fair markets and the benefit of them. And I think it is tremendously important that the UK and Europe more generally work together to make the case for trade. 4 principles, I would say, that should underline our thinking on it, 4 principles that underline the UK's approach to these issues. First is being unashamed in the message that trade and business is a force for good. That having those open markets, having that competition is part of the solution, not the problem. It is essential for our economic security and our economic prosperity. At the same time, we need to recognize, secondly, that for that to be the case, we need rules. We need rules that are understood, that are respected, that are enforced. And that is why when we work together, for example, in the support of the World Trade Organization, that's not just trying to prop up an organization for the sake of an organization. It's because those rules and the ability to enforce those rules are fundamental if we're going to allow trade to be open and fair. So we need to make sure that whatever we're doing, it is consistent with the international rules for free and open competition. Third principle is that we need to ensure that the rules protect wider equities. It is not wrong that people want to ensure that trade is fully supportive of sustainability, of security, of social justice. It's absolutely essential that we ensure that our rules allow for trade to do that. That's important for itself because those issues really matter. It's also important for maintaining faith and belief in trade and investment. We need to be able to demonstrate that it is not a barrier to sustainability and security and social justice, but on the contrary, it is a prime means of delivering that sustainability, security, and social justice. So, yes, we need to acknowledge that trade and investment is a force for good and be unashamed in stating that. We need to make sure that we have the rules that allow that to be the case, ensure that the rules are protecting wider equities. And then finally, we need to recognize the risks. Much as we might wish otherwise, the fact is there are players who do not want to abide by the rules, who will want to undermine competition, who do adopt practices which we don't think are commensurate with our values. So we need to understand those and we need to mitigate them. That can be through relatively soft means, through diplomacy, through increasing the diversity of our supply chains, through developing domestic capability. Sometimes it'll have to have a harder edge. We will need to use the dispute mechanisms where trade and investment is unfair. We will need to apply remedies. We will, at the worst case, have to apply sanctions. So we should not be ashamed of using those tools where it's necessary. But the fundamental starting point from where we should be, and certainly from the UK position, is that open and fair trade is a force for good, and that is part of the solution, not the problem. And UK and Europe have got a key role to play together in that. We can learn from each other, we can think together as we try to find out how do we make sure that we balance those different ends, and we can act together, making sure that we are influencing the wider community in support of that open, fair trade and investment on which our prosperity and security depends. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd leave you with those 3 thoughts about the fundamental importance of the UK-Europe trade and investment relationship, the hugely positive opportunities we have to see that grow, and the fundamental importance of that, not just for ourselves, but for the global trading and wider economic environment. Thank you very much indeed.